The manager's voice sliced through Luxbite's opulence. "Your attire is unacceptable," Elliot Grayson declared, his eyes raking across the woman in front of him like she was an uninvited guest at a private club. The crystal chandeliers above cast elegant shadows across the velvet-paneled walls, but no light softened the contempt etched in Elliot's voice. Nia Carter, 52 years old and unshaken, stood with her back straight and her chin slightly lifted, wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her frame with understated grace. Her heels were modest, her purse classic, her presence dignified, but none of that mattered. Before we continue, where are you watching from if Nia's stand speaks to you? Subscribe now. Tomorrow's tale will move you. Leave a comment below. The camera returned to the moment. Behind Elliot. The restaurant buzzed with wealth and whispers. From a plush booth near the center of the room, Vivian Holt, 55, dripping in sequins and entitlement, raised her martini and smirked, her voice carrying just enough to wound. "She hardly compliments our refined ambiance," she quipped, eyes narrowing at Nia like she were observing a stain on imported silk. The comment struck not just with cruelty but with precision. Carson Wells, a young white server with carefully gelled hair and a tight jaw, stepped in with artificial charm, holding a folded napkin like it was a peace offering. "There's a diner 2 blocks down," he said smoothly. "Might suit you better." The sting wasn't in the words alone, but in the performative gasps of guests pretending not to look, the glances exchanged like currency, the quiet chuckles from a neighboring table. Nia paused, not to defend herself, but to gather power. "Your judgment is a profound mistake," she said, her voice clear, tempered, and dangerously calm. Elliot gestured sharply, his practiced smile gone. "Carson, please escort the lady out," he said with the clipped confidence of someone used to his orders being obeyed. Carson moved closer, but Nia stood firm. Vivian, now delighted with the attention, sipped her drink and added, "This establishment is no place for someone so misplaced." She raised her phone and snapped a photo. A second later, it appeared on her Instagram, a filtered image of Nia with the caption, "Luxbite upholds class." Carson extended his hand again, not to help, but to hasten her exit. "Leave before you embarrass yourself further," he said under his breath. Voice low and sharp, one guest muttered. "She doesn't belong," as if repeating an old rule passed down in silence. Nia took the napkin but didn't use it. Her fingers tightened around her purse strap. "You will answer for this," she said softly, locking eyes with Elliot. The words didn't land like a threat. They landed like a promise. Behind the bar, Lila Monroe, a bartender in her early 40s with a sharp memory for faces and injustice, slid her phone quietly into recording mode. She angled it just enough to capture Elliot's words and Vivian's smirk without raising suspicion. She gave Nia the faintest nod, almost a prayer in gesture. At table 9, Jaden Brooks, a polished black man in a tailored gray suit, discreetly opened a live stream on his tablet. A known tech entrepreneur. He didn't speak, but his camera did. The lens panned slowly toward the confrontation. At the far end of the bar sat Tara Evans, a veteran journalist with tired eyes and a keen ear. She slid a slim recorder under her napkin, pressing the button with a thumb that trembled slightly. Not from fear, but anticipation. Seated just behind a row of waiting staff was Marcus Reed, a tall man in his 50s with a presence too quiet to be ignored. He nursed a glass of water, observing like a hawk under disguise. To most. He looked like another high-end patron. To Nia, he was backup. His gaze met hers briefly, giving her the signal she needed. Nia brushed her earring, triggering a micro-recorder embedded inside. It captured everything, the venom in Carson's tone, the laughter bubbling from Vivian's booth, and Elliot's smug instruction. She turned slightly toward Jaden and whispered, "Share it discreetly." He nodded once. Within moments, Lila's video, paired with Jaden's footage, began uploading under the tag Luxbite Injustice. The caption read, "When elegance meets exclusion." The video spread quietly, first to a few, then hundreds. In the corner of the screen, views ticked upward, 5,000, 8,000, 12. A ripple in the digital ocean that would soon become a wave. Elliot turned back to his podium, unaware that the woman he had dismissed was documenting his collapse in real time. Naya's breath stayed steady. Her voice did not rise. She didn't plead. She looked at Elliot once more and said, "You've just begun to lose." The words hung in the air, heavier than any chandelier above them. As she turned, Vivian raised her glass one last time, toasting to her own ignorance. What they didn't know was that the room wasn't filled with allies. It was filled with witnesses. This wasn't just a moment. It was a fuse being lit. And what came next would not be quiet. The affront was calculated, not casual. The humiliation, intentional. And as Naya exited without bowing her head, her every step out of the dining room was one step closer to a reckoning. She had been turned away at doors before, corporate boardrooms, financial summits, political fundraisers, places where her skin was a barrier before her resume ever mattered. She had learned long ago not to argue with people who were committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she built Silver Peak in silence, piece by piece, funding it with every slight she turned into motivation. And years ago, when Luxbite refused to take her catering proposal seriously, she smiled, walked away, and purchased it anonymously through Silver Peak Holdings. Now, she stood not just as a guest, but as the ghost in the walls, ready to rewrite the script. The staff didn't recognize her. Elliot never read the ownership memo. Vivian never imagined the woman she scorned could own the lease under her chair. Carson never dreamed that the napkin he offered would become the symbol of his exit. But Nia knew. And now, the first video was live. The air inside Luxbite thickened as Elliot Grayson's voice boomed across the dining room, slicing through conversations like a cleaver through bone. "She's disrupting our standards," he barked toward the bar, motioning to security with an urgency that sounded rehearsed. One of the guards, a towering man in a blazer too tight at the seams, stepped forward. Guests at nearby tables leaned in with feigned disinterest, watching the unfolding scene like spectators at a play they had paid too much to ignore. Vivian Holt, still perched in her booth like royalty, lifted her phone and began filming. "Luxbite rejects mediocrity," she declared, her voice full of self-importance, before posting the video to Instagram with a flourish of her diamond-ringed hand. Carson Wells appeared again at Nia's side, this time with a glass of ice water. His expression was sharp, his steps deliberate. Without a word, he tipped the glass just slightly forward as he passed her, enough for the cold liquid to splash across her polished black shoes and dark stockings. "You're out of your league," he muttered, almost too softly to hear, but not soft enough. The water beaded on her shoes, then dripped onto the marble floor in tiny, glittering puddles. A couple across the aisle nodded faintly, one of them whispering, "She's spoiling the evening." Nia looked down at the wet leather, then back up at Carson, her gaze steady. "Your actions," she said clearly, "are unlawful." She wasn't raising her voice. She was documenting the moment with every syllable. Security moved closer, their hands hovering near her arms. Elliot gestured again, more forcefully now, calling out over the music. "She's barred from Luxbite indefinitely." Vivian smirked, enjoying the show with theatrical flair. She reached over and snatched the strap of Nia's purse, lifting it from her shoulder and tossing it toward Carson, who let it drop near the exit like discarded luggage. "Take your belongings and go," he said, his words acidic, his smile razor-thin. Nia walked toward the bag, heels clicking. She bent down, picked it up slowly, and turned to face them. "You're all documented," she said, voice like steel. The cameras didn't blink. That line would be quoted hundreds of times within the hour. The weight of the moment brought her back. Not just to corporate boardrooms where deals were made and doors were shut, but to earlier rooms, smaller ones, where whispers behind closed doors declared her too rough, too unrefined, too black. The sting of Vivian's tone echoed those moments, resurrecting faces long forgotten, names once feared, voices that tried to shrink her into silence. But Nia had never been quiet, and today, silence was not an option. At the edge of the bar, Lila Monroe listened closely. She had stepped into the hallway briefly and returned just in time to hear Elliot's whisper to Vivian. "Her kind hurts our image." It was said without irony, without shame, and it hung in the air like a stain that refused to dry. Lila caught it, every word, on her phone. Her thumb hit the upload button like pulling a pin from a grenade. She slipped the phone into her apron, poured a drink with perfect calm, and slid it to a guest as if nothing happened. Then she walked past Jaden and whispered, "You'll want this." The entrepreneur accepted the airdropped video without looking up, and within seconds, his live stream jumped from hundreds of viewers to thousands. Comments streamed in, "This is racist, disgusting, expose them." "Where's the owner at the bar?" Tara Evans saw it too. She was already mid-tweet when the clip from Lila dropped into her inbox. She didn't hesitate. She posted it to X with the hashtag #LuxBiteInjustice, and a single-line manager caught on tape. Within 10 minutes, it had 700,000 views. 15 minutes in, it crossed 2 million. The video spread like a storm surge from activists to influencers, from journalists to politicians. Screens lit up across the city. Diners at LuxBite watched it unfold in real time. Some lowered their eyes. Others glanced toward Nia. No longer the object of ridicule, but the center of something they didn't yet understand. A man near the window cleared his throat and said, "I think we're on the wrong side of this." Vivian glanced at her phone and froze. Her face turned the color of her drink. "That's fabricated," she hissed, shoving her phone at Elliot. "You need to get control of this." Elliot's jaw clenched. He stepped toward a group of diners and snapped, "Turn off your phones or leave!" But it was too late. Screens were everywhere, and control had already slipped through his fingers. At a nearby table, a teenage girl whispered, "Mom, is that her, the one in the video?" Her mother nodded slowly. "Yes." "And she's still standing." Nia felt the energy shift, not just in the room, but in the air itself. The same voices that had whispered against her were now silent, watching, waiting. The fire had been lit, and the smoke was rising fast. Marcus Reed, still seated, glanced at his phone as a new notification blinked across the screen, a leaked internal email from Elliot. Time-stamped just last week. It read, "We need to be more selective with our clientele. We serve a certain class here." The email came from an anonymous tip, later confirmed by Marcus himself, who had quietly gained access to LuxBite's communications systems through Silver Peak's legal backdoor. He forwarded it to Tara, who added it to her thread. Now the world saw not just a moment of prejudice, but a pattern, a strategy, an ideology wrapped in menu prices and dress codes. Elliot paled. Vivian panicked. Carson clenched his jaw. But Nia Carter stood exactly where she had started. Not banished. Not bowed. Not gone. She was the storm they hadn't seen coming. And now, the twist had landed. Security closed in like shadows, stretching at dusk, flanking Nia Carter from both sides, their uniforms crisp, their expressions blank, trained to remove without question. Elliot Grayson stood tall at the front of Luxbite's dining room, his voice rising with a forced authority that betrayed his unraveling control. "She's a disgrace to our legacy," he declared, gesturing as if Nia were an intruder and he the final word on who belonged in this temple of taste and texture, the restaurant. Once humming with soft jazz and clinking glasses, now thrummed with tension. Diners had stopped pretending not to look. Phones tilted subtly. Screens glowed under tables. The scene unfolded in real time, each moment carved into memory. Vivian Holt, never one to miss a performance, plucked a napkin from her place setting and tossed it in Nia's direction like a discarded verdict. "Luxury isn't for you," she said. Her voice dipped in honey and venom. The napkin fluttered through the air and landed at Nia's feet like a flag of insult. Carson Wells appeared again, uninvited, unashamed, and with a smirk. Nudged a wine glass dangerously close to the edge of the table near her. "Back to where you came from," he muttered, not quite under his breath. The glass teetered, then tipped, its contents spilling in a crimson streak across the white marble floor. Gasps rose. A few diners nodded in twisted approval. In the far corner of the room, a local news crew, tipped off by Tara Evans, had arrived just moments earlier and was now filming live. Their boom mic floated above the scene. Catching every syllable, the anchorwoman whispered to her cameraman, "Keep rolling. This is going national." Nia didn't flinch. She brushed the napkin aside with her heel, not demeaning herself by picking it up. "Your time is up," she said, her voice low, firm, final. The guard seized her arms, not with violence, but with certainty. Elliot stepped forward, holding her reservation card between two fingers like a ticket that had expired. "You're irrelevant here," he said. Then, with theatrical flourish, he tore the card in two and dropped it into a candle flame at the maitre d's stand. The paper curled into black ash as Vivian live-streamed the moment, her voice smug Luxbites too refined for her. The clip hit her feed just as security began guiding Nia toward the exit, her heels still echoing softly, her shoulders still straight. A diner near the door muttered coldly, "Stay away next time." Nia paused, turned slightly, and said evenly, "This is all preserved. Cameras didn't blink, screens didn't dim, history didn't miss." The napkin, white, monogrammed, petty, brought her back to another moment, decades earlier. In a midtown conference room where a partner at a private equity firm had quietly slid a brochure for a secretarial program across the table during her interview. "We think you're more suited to support roles," he had said then, smiling like he was doing her a favor. That smile lived in Elliot's face now. That condescension echoed in Vivian's tone. That glass of wine, now bleeding across the floor, mirrored years of exclusion cloaked in civility, but exclusion had made her strong. It had made her precise. It had made her ready. As the guards neared the door, Nia reached into her purse and withdrew a slim USB drive. She slipped it into Jaden Brooks's hand with a whisper, "Get this to Tara." Jaden, already holding his tablet midstream, slid the drive into his jacket without hesitation. "Truth will prevail," Nia added, louder now. "For all to hear?" Carson lunged, trying to kick the USB from Jaden's grasp, but Lila Monroe intercepted, stepping between them like a quiet shield. "Go," she told Jaden. He did, out the side entrance, into the waiting car. Lila turned back to Carson, her expression steady. "You just kicked your future," she said. Carson said nothing. He was beginning to understand, moments later. Tara Evans received the drive and loaded the contents into her encrypted laptop. What she found made her hands shake, not with fear, but with fury. The dossier was exhaustive, a compiled report of Elliot Grayson's emails and internal messages, all pulled from his Luxbyte account by Marcus Reed under legal pretext through Silver Peak. The messages were damning. Avoid urban clientele. They ruin the vibe. Read one. Don't seat anyone who looks local. Read another. Limit access to women who wear synthetic hair. Bad optics. It was not just exclusion. It was a strategy of social erasure, sanitized through policy, papered over by etiquette. Tara uploaded the entire dossier to X and Instagram. Hashtagged simply #Luxbyte exposed. The post detonated online. 20 million views in the first 20 minutes. Screens in Times Square lit up with the story. Media outlets scrambled to report it live. Luxbyte's reservation system froze under pressure as thousands of bookings were canceled in protest. By the time Nia reached the sidewalk outside, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It read, "We're dominating." She looked at the screen, smiled faintly, and typed back 2 words, "Prepare everything," behind her. Luxbyte still gleamed in gold and glass, but its foundation had cracked. Inside, Elliot shouted for someone to shut off the Wi-Fi. Vivian cursed as her followers began to turn on her. Carson stood by the wine cart, motionless, his hands curled into fists. But outside, Nia stood in the wind, not as a woman ejected, but as a storm returned. Inside the executive suite of Luxbyte's headquarters, 27 floors above the Manhattan skyline, the mood was no longer polished. Charles Vance, the restaurant's principal stakeholder and co-founder, stood before a floor-to-ceiling screen displaying a live feed of #Luxbyte exposed. The numbers ticked up by the second, 60 million views, 200,000 reposts, an avalanche of condemnation in every language spoken across the city. Charles's face had drained of its usual confidence, his jaw tight as he turned toward his inner circle. "Who is this woman?" he snapped, gesturing at a still image of Nia Carter, captured mid-step, her face composed even as security gripped her arms. Silence hung. Elliot Grayson, sweat collecting at his temples, shifted in his chair. "Her name is Nia Carter," he said quickly. "She caused this. She ambushed us." Vivian Holt, patched in remotely from her penthouse suite, chimed in through the speakerphone, her voice thin and defensive. Her little stunt made me a target. "My followers are calling me a racist. I demand Luxbyte issue a statement." Charles turned away, ignoring her. On the wall, a booking dashboard flickered red, cancellations pouring in, sponsors withdrawing, weekend reservations plummeting towards zero. "This isn't just a scandal," said Meredith Lynn, the brand director. "This is an extinction event." Elliot stood, voice rising. "We should sue her. Public defamation. Fabrication of evidence. She manipulated this." Vivian's voice followed immediately. "She's a fraud. I'll say it on camera." But Charles wasn't listening. He was staring at a line item in a buried ownership document that had surfaced in an internal audit. Highlighted by the legal team, a single line, "Majority holding Silver Peak Holdings, LLC." His brow furrowed. That name again. He murmured, almost to himself, "Silver Peak." He tapped the screen, bringing up a profile. It was all clean, too clean. A shadow company, ironclad in structure, and suddenly familiar. That was when the email came in. From Nia Carter. The subject line was simple press conference in 15 minutes, or Luxbyte closes. Charles froze. "She has no authority to," he began. But Meredith cut in, pointing at the screen. "She's not bluffing." Charles opened the message. Attached were scanned documents bearing the Silver Peak Holdings seal. Power of attorney, trustee rights, equity authority. All filed 6 months ago. All binding. Beneath them, a short line from her counsel. "All actions will comply with New York commercial law. Failure to respond constitutes consent to operational changes. Charles lowered the tablet slowly, as if it might explode. "Get legal," he said. "Now." Across the city, in a quiet meeting space leased by Silver Peak. Marcus Reed placed his phone on the table and looked at Nia. "They've seen the docs." Nia, calm as stone, nodded. "Execute now," she said. He slid a digital file to his legal assistant. Within minutes, LuxByte's board received notification due to a controlling interest transferred via trust. All executive authority for LuxByte operations temporarily rested with Nia Carter, acting partner of Silver Peak. The legal ground shifted beneath Elliot's feet before he could mount a defense. He stormed into Charles's office just as the lawyers arrived on a conference call, their voices curt and precise. The footage, the emails, the trending data, the trust documents. "If we don't move now, we'll be sued into oblivion," one said flatly. Vivian's voice came through again, shrill now. "Tell them to shut this down," but even she could hear it, her power draining away with every second the story stayed live. Charles rubbed his temples. 15 minutes. He muttered, "We meet her, and we listen." The camera cut to Nia standing at a press podium inside LuxByte's lobby, marble underfoot, crystal fixtures above. But all eyes locked on the woman in black. Her posture was still regal. Her voice, when it came, was calm. "I am here not as a guest," she said, "but as a co-owner of this establishment, for those harmed, for those dismissed, for those recorded and humiliated. I speak as the one holding the pen now." Behind her stood Marcus, arms folded, and to her right, Lila Monroe, no longer just a bartender, but a symbol. LuxByte's identity crisis is over. Nia continued. "It does not belong to those who exclude, but to those who elevate." At that moment, Elliot appeared at the edge of the room, his face pale, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. He opened his mouth, but Nia spoke first. "This is your last evening here, Mr. Grayson, and I suggest you spend it packing." She turned to the cameras. "We will restore what was lost here: dignity, access, truth." The staff watching from the stairwell didn't cheer. They simply stood a little straighter, because for the first time, they knew who they were working for. The marble lobby of LuxByte, once reserved for silent welcomes and white linen elegance, had become a battlefield of perception, lit by camera flashes and humming with news crews as the press conference unfolded in real time. Charles Vance stood near the edge of the podium, his arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. But the power had already shifted away from him. At center stage stood Nia Carter, no longer just a patron or an inconvenient guest, but a commanding presence in front of 24 reporters, live streams feeding the nation a new reality. The backdrop was deliberate, LuxByte's gold-plated name shining behind her, not as a symbol of exclusion, but of reclamation. Her voice came steady. "I came here tonight to dine, not to divide," she said, meeting the gaze of each camera. "But when dignity is denied, justice must answer." From the left aisle, Elliot Grayson pushed through a cluster of onlookers, face flushed, fists clenched, his voice rising like a man who believed he still held the room. "You don't get to rewrite the rules," he barked. "You're just a face in a file. You don't own LuxByte. Silver Peak does." Nia turned to him slowly, a calm descending around her like armor. "And I am Silver Peak," she said. The room fell silent. Even Charles blinked. Nia reached into her folder and lifted a single document. Embossed with legal authority, "I am the founder and managing director of Silver Peak Holdings. LuxByte was acquired under trust 8 months ago. I authorized that acquisition. I funded it. I now control it." The gravity of her words dropped like a stone into still water. Elliot's shoulders slumped as his defiance began to fray. "This isn't real," he muttered. But the paper was already being displayed on the press monitor behind them. Ownership filings, partnership agreements, all bearing her name, Vivian Holt, patched in via video to defend her public standing. Suddenly became very still in her seat as the cameras shifted to her. "Vivian Holt," Nia said without raising her voice, "you are hereby banned from LuxBite indefinitely. Your actions, captured and witnessed, violate every principle this establishment will now stand for." Vivian sputtered, "You can't." But Nia cut in, not with volume, but with clarity. "You don't belong in a space built on equality while you uphold exclusion." Vivian's screen went dark. Carson Wells, standing stiff near the wine station, attempted to slink away. But Marcus Reed stepped forward and blocked his path. "Stay," Marcus said, his tone polite but iron beneath it. Nia addressed the room again. "Carson Wells has also been relieved of duty, effective immediately. His conduct tonight was not service. It was sanctioned cruelty." Carson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked not ashamed, but stunned, as if punishment had never been part of the world he lived in. The audience murmured, some in support, some in disbelief. Charles Vance, now watching with the reluctant composure of a man seeing his legacy rewritten in real time, stepped to the mic. "Ms. Carter," he said, carefully, "what exactly do you seek?" Nia met his gaze. "Restoration." She replied, "Accountability, a culture of hospitality, not hierarchy. This place was built to welcome, not to wound." The crowd leaned forward. It was not just a speech, it was a declaration. Then came the final twist. Nia gestured toward the conference room doors. They opened, and in walked Elena Cruz, a nationally recognized civil rights attorney, poised and unshakable, carrying a briefcase and a stack of sealed files. "This is Ms. Cruz," Nia said. "She's here to share what the investigation uncovered." Elena took the podium. "Our legal review has revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices at LuxBite," she said, flipping open her documents. "Emails, incident reports, guest denials based on dress code language designed to exclude communities of color. Not isolated incidents, but a culture." Gasps stirred. Reporters raised their phones higher. Elena continued. "We have submitted evidence to the New York City Human Rights Commission. A federal review is being considered. But the choice is yours. Mr. Vance, cooperate with reform, or risk closure under violation of civil code." Charles looked around the room, his empire suddenly unfamiliar. He saw the phones, the news cameras, the staff watching from the balcony. He saw Lila Monroe, arms crossed, no longer just an employee, but a witness. He saw Marcus Reed, silent but firm. And above all, he saw Nia, unshaken, undefeated, unmoved, slowly. He reached for the file on the podium and signed. Applause broke out. Not loud, but steady. Not triumphant, but necessary. Nia stepped back, letting the weight of that moment settle. The very place that had tried to erase her had become her stage, and tomorrow, it would become her blueprint, within 2 weeks of the press conference. LuxBite looked and felt like a different place, not just in surface gestures or staff turnover, but in soul. The velvet chairs remained. The chandeliers still cast their golden light, but the atmosphere had shifted from exclusion to invitation. At the center of it all was Nia Carter, now publicly acknowledged not just as the owner, but as the architect of reform. She walked the floor daily, not to inspect, but to listen, with her guidance. The restaurant launched Fair Taste, a mandatory anti-bias initiative that went far beyond surface training. It included live scenario workshops, bi-weekly reviews of guest experiences, and quarterly diversity audits conducted by third-party observers. Every employee, from kitchen porter to head chef, was required to complete equity modules tailored to real-world service scenarios, ensuring that fairness wasn't a statement, but a standard. Carson Wells had been replaced by a young Latinx hospitality graduate named Sofia Mendez, who greeted guests with warmth and clarity. Vivian Holt's former booth had been removed entirely, replaced by a small corner lounge called The Table We Build, reserved for community leaders and guests who had once been made to feel small. Lux Bites social media now told stories of inclusion, a deaf couple enjoying a tasting menu with ASL-trained staff, a mother and daughter celebrating Juneteenth with a heritage-inspired dessert, a veteran in a hoodie being seated without question, Tara Evans, now the director of public narrative, managed the restaurant's digital voice. While Jaden Brooks advised on outreach strategy, Marcus Reed worked from an upstairs legal suite, ensuring compliance wasn't optional. The public responded, guests returned, reservations surged, not for luxury, but for integrity. But Nia wasn't finished. The injustice she faced hadn't been unique. It was systemic, replicated in restaurants from Brooklyn to Beverly Hills. So, from Lux Bites' restored platform, she unveiled a broader initiative, Dine Equal, backed by Silver Peak and the Cruise Legal Network. Dine Equal proposed a nationwide certification for restaurants to earn the seal. Businesses would need to submit to regular anti-discrimination audits, commit to inclusive hiring, and publicly post their service code of ethics. At first, there was hesitation. Chains balked. PR teams pushed back. But the viral momentum was unrelenting. If LuxBite can do it. One headline read, "What's your excuse within a month?" Over 2,000 independent restaurants applied for the certification by spring. 4 major chains, facing pressure from civic groups and social media campaigns, announced full compliance. Training centers adopted fair taste. Culinary schools updated their ethics curriculum. Dine Equal was no longer a proposal. It was a movement. Nia remained measured through it all. She declined interviews that sought spectacle, choosing instead to speak at forums, town halls, and industry panels. Her message was always the same. Hospitality must start with humanity. When asked if she felt vindicated, she paused and answered, "I feel responsible." LuxBite had been the spark. Dine Equal was the fire. And for every guest who had ever been looked up and down, for every child told they weren't what fine dining looked like, for every silent witness who wished they'd spoken sooner, the future of dining had been quietly, permanently changed. In the weeks that followed, the ripple became a reckoning. Elliot Grayson's career collapsed with brutal finality. No amount of spin or backdoor references could obscure the digital trail he had left behind. Once a polished face in hospitality circles, he found himself locked out of the industry that had once welcomed him with open arms. A quiet resignation letter surfaced, typed in a font too formal, ending with a single line, "I regret nothing except being caught." He vanished from Manhattan's networking events and was last seen applying for consulting work under an alias. His LinkedIn now blank. Vivian Holt, once a fixture of uptown charity galas and curated influencer brunches, saw her social standing disintegrate in real time. Luxury brands cut ties. Her speaking engagements were pulled. Her loyal followers, once eager to mimic her elegance, turned on her with precision, reposting her own video with captions that asked, "Is this who we are?" Tabloids ran the story for a week. Then they stopped. Not because she redeemed herself, but because she became irrelevant. And Carson Wells, once so smug in his casual cruelty, now folded linen in the back of a quiet midtown bistro, stripped of prestige. He worked his shifts in silence, the staff half aware of who he used to be. His arrogance faded not with shame, but with exhaustion. Yet it was in his story that something unexpected stirred. One afternoon, after 2 weeks of silence, Carson walked into Luxbite, hat in hand, pride set aside, and asked to speak with Nia Carter. She received him not in the main dining room, but in the quiet back corner now reserved for community rebuilding. He did not plead. He did not perform. He asked, "Is there a way back?" Nia looked at him long and hard. Her silence stretched not by anger, but by discernment. Then she handed him a pamphlet, Open Table. It read a program Nia had launched for service workers seeking a second chance. Guided by mentorship, training, and a record of accountability, Carson studied the paper like it was a lifeline. "This isn't forgiveness," she said. "It's a path. And it won't be easy." Carson nodded. "I don't expect easy. Lila Monroe became his mentor." She didn't smile at first, didn't soften, but she showed up. Week after week, by month's end. He was back on the floor, not as a server, but as a trainee under review. Redemption wasn't a headline. It was a shift-by-shift choice. Meanwhile, Luxbite thrived, not because of scandal, but because of integrity. Families who had once felt unwelcome now walked in freely, seated without scrutiny. Retired teachers, young creatives, single mothers. No one questioned their clothing, their accents, or the way they arrived. The restaurant's reputation transformed from elite to essential, earning accolades not just from food critics, but from social advocates. The James Beard Foundation called it a model of justice through service. Tourists snapped photos not of the food, but of the plaque near the entrance. Dignity served here. But perhaps the most lasting legacy came in the form of a foundation, Taste Justice, that launched quietly by Nia through Silver Peak. Its mission was bold: to support legal defense for victims of dining discrimination, to fund scholarships for marginalized hospitality students, and to offer grants for inclusive restaurant startups. It began with one office in New York. By summer, it had 6. Its hotline helped dozens file complaints in cities where silence had once been the norm. Nia remained behind the scenes. She didn't speak often to the press. When asked what inspired the foundation, she answered simply, "No one should have to film their pain just to be served." And though Luxbite was her most visible work, she knew the real change was quieter, in the kitchens that now trained with equity, in the dining rooms where hosts asked questions without judgment, and in the faces of diners who no longer had to prove they belonged. 1 year after the night she was told to leave, Nia stood once more at Luxbite's front entrance, not as a statement, but as a ritual. She watched as an elderly black couple entered, arm in arm, smiling without hesitation. As a queer teen in jeans and a rainbow pin was seated with ease. As a single father with a toddler in tow was welcomed with a booster seat and a warm grin. Nia nodded to the new maitre d' and quietly stepped aside. Her work was still unfolding, but her presence had already rewritten the room. That evening, a final post appeared on Luxbite's X account, composed by Tara and approved by Nia. Justice prevails when truth confronts prejudice. Nia Carter turned humiliation into progress. Where have you witnessed unfairness? Tell us. Share. Remember. Because dignity belongs at every table. The comments poured in, some painful, some proud, and somewhere between them, a movement stayed alive.